Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Highway 64 podcast from Murphy to Manteo. The Highway 64 project is a collaboration between Elon University's Professional Writing and Rhetoric program and the Environmental Studies Department to explore the local intricacies of culture, community, and climate resiliency along Highway 64 in North Carolina. Highway 64, running from the mountains to the ocean, is our North Carolina Heritage Highway and serves as a metaphor that represents the rich geographical, cultural, and ecological diversity that is our state. My name is Olivia Love, and I am the producer of the podcast and a researcher on our team. Our guest for today is Sarah Lasswell, an artist farmer and the driving force behind Moss and Thistle Farm in Union Mills, North Carolina. Today's conversation will focus on a unique form of burial vessels designed so that you can still give back to the environment even after death. With me today as well is Dr. Michael Strickland, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, folks. Thank you for joining our next episode of the podcast. Michael Strickland, Director of the Center for Environmental Studies here at Elon. I also teach in the PWR program and the coordinator of the Highway 64 project. I'm really pleased to have our guest today, Sarah Lasswell, the proprietor of Moss and Thistle Farm. I came across Moss and Thistle via an old friend who's on one of our first podcasts this season. Kimberly Campbell, and I'm not going to go into great detail about how far back Miss Kimberly and I go, but I'll just say it was in grad school in a previous century. So, but she turned me on to the project that Sarah is doing up in Rutherford County, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to kind of tell us a little more about herself, and then we'll ask her some questions and kind of get a conversation going about this very unique process that she does.
Hey, hi, my name is Sarah Lasswell, and I am in Union Mills, North Carolina. I have 22 acres of beautiful woodlands and pastures and streams where we grow basketry willow that we weave into woven caskets, primarily for natural or green burials.
So, how did Moss and Thistle Farm come to be, and what led you into this very unusual area? Because we can easily see that it's a very niche concept, but can you just tell us a little bit more about how unique Moss and Thistle Farm is?
Sure. So I first came to this land in 2016, intending to homestead with my family and started planting cut flowers as a way to help raise money to regenerate the land. It had been vacant for a couple decades, and so we had a lot of restorative work to do. And one of the fields that I was using down in our bottomland had a problem with erosion. So I planted a row of basketry willow as a way to stabilize the soil. And one day was looking around on the internet about what to do with this new resource on the farm. And I saw a picture of a willow casket. And I just thought it was the most beautiful thing, first of all. It just really struck me with how natural and beautiful and warm it was. And then once I learned about green burial and natural burial, I was just hooked. It just seemed like the thing that we all want that we didn't know we could have, and it's actually right here in our backyard.
Mhm.
And there was not anyone here in the Southeast. There were actually only two people in North America at the time doing woven willow caskets. It's pretty common in the UK, Ireland, places like that. But there were only two people here doing it. So I was able to learn how to weave caskets in the fall of 2020 from Mary Lauren Fraser up in Vermont. And I've been doing it ever since.
Well, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask is how many people are actually doing things like this? You say when you started, you were one of only two. But are there
Yeah.
more now?
Yes, I was number three, and the
Okay.
thing that really was holding us back in the first years was willow supply. Willow, basketry willow isn't a real common cash crop that we grow
Right.
here in North America. And so there were people interested in the craft, but there just was not enough willow to go around.
Yeah.
So I was number three, and for a few years, we kind of split the willow that we could find between us, making sure we all had enough. And as new growers have come on the scene, we've been taking on apprentices and training new people. Plus, there have been a few folks that have gone over to England and learned from weavers there. So we've got a couple weavers in Canada now that went over to England to learn, as well as one in Chicago. And I think we're up to 8 or 9 in North America at this point, across Canada and the United States.
I like what you said earlier about it being an alternative that we all want but didn't know was out there. And I clearly remember when Kimberly was at the forefront of the whole green burial movement. Remember seeing her on the Today Show and things like that. And this was back in the 90s. And, everybody was saying this will never catch on. Too many laws and regulations against it. But, she and Billy fought that battle for a long time. And now there are green burial sites in many, many states. I don't know exactly how many, but are people who come to you mostly from North Carolina or from all around the Southeast?
Well, I work very closely with the green burial grounds that are within kind of a 5 or 6 mile radius, or sorry, five or
Oh,
six hour
oh,
drive
okay.
radius
Yeah,
of
yeah,
my
yeah,
farm,
yeah.
which I've got 4 or 5 cemeteries within that radius that I work with, and so they send me families directly,
Okay.
and so that's Larkspur in Tennessee out to the west, and then out Blue Stem is sort of the furthest east that I go, which is outside of Durham,
Hmm.
down to Kimberly and Billy in
Hmm.
South Carolina, as well as down to Florida and then up as far as Charlottesville, Virginia. That's kind of the
Okay.
areas that I primarily serve. But because the heart of my business is including people in the weaving of the caskets, whether that is for themselves or for a loved one that they have lost or are preparing to say goodbye to, people have started coming to visit and do that work with me from all over the country, which
Okay.
has been really exciting. And then following Hurricane Helene in 24, I started traveling to go to people's homes and weave their caskets with them in their space, which has been
Oh,
a whole new dimension to see their burial vessel take place amongst their friends and family and their home. And that's been really special. So last year I was up in New York City. I went up to Wisconsin. I'm hoping to go out to the West Coast later this year.
that's fascinating. I didn't realize that you also went to people's home sites to
Yeah,
help
like
with this.
the newest development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you something that's a little more philosophical about the the deeper purposes and goals of why you got into this. Olivia and I have been talking about it, and we kind of assume there's both a spiritual and an ecological dimension to the rationale behind what you're doing. But I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people in general find green burial through the environmental lens. And I do a lot of speaking and education to try and, spread the good news that this is an option. And it's kind of like come for the environmentalism, stay for the heart and the human. I
Okay.
think once people find out what this work is truly about at a human level,
Hmm.
that's where the real beauty and the magic takes place.
Right.
Obviously it is a much smaller footprint on the earth, and a green burial sequesters 25 grams of or 25 pounds of carbon instead of the huge footprint that we leave through a conventional burial with a cement
Hmm.
vault and a steel casket and all of the machinery and all that.
Right.
Um, but there's a lot of just personal involvement. Families are often very closely involved. They might help dig the grave. Very often they help fill it in after the burial. It's a graveside service. People lower their own loved ones down if they want. And I think these, physical actions that we take to lay our dead to rest are something that are really important to us on a fundamental level. And we've really been separated from that in the last few
Right.
generations. But
Right.
it's not that far of a separation. I watch people who are doing this for the first time, and it's like a light clicks on. Like, we know how to do this work. We know that this
Mhm.
matters. We know that this is what we're meant to do. And when we start doing it, there's healing there. There's strength there that we've been separate from a
Mhm.
while.
Mhm. And I guess that's something our ancestors knew and understood for thousands of years, and the 20th
Right.
century kind of pushed us away from that.
Yeah, we evolved doing this work.
Hmm.
This is in our bones. We know how to do this and we know why we do this.
Right. Right.
That, connects perfectly into what I wanted to bring up next was what, like, you believe is the most important part of building and, weaving your own casket while rather than just buying one through the normal more, quote, unquote, "normal funeral process" that a lot of
Mhm.
people go through? And more specifically, what do your, personalized workshops look like for families who are interested?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's definitely a range because not everybody is in a place to be able to plan ahead. Sometimes things happen unexpectedly, and we find ourselves having to make these decisions that we had not prepared for.
Right.
And I think even in those cases, when a family calls me, I do keep them ready to go for folks that need them right away. They still get to talk to the person that made the casket. They get
Hmm.
to, I leave the final closures and interior bedding is something we can collaborate on. So they do have a chance to make some choices and have some say. They can come out and spend a day doing that with me. They can come pick the casket up and deliver it to the funeral home themselves and kind of take ownership that way. Sometimes they just come out and meet me and shake my hand and just have that personal connection, and it gives you something to do in that really terrible time between a death and a burial where you feel really helpless.
Hmm.
It can, just give you something concrete to connect to in the process. So that's, kind of one end of it. And then there's the ground where you get to actually come and be part of it. And like I said, that might be somebody planning ahead for themselves. Some folks will come and they'll stay an entire week and they will weave every rod of their own casket
Hmm.
and be part of every step of the process. And I think that experience is a very specific experience about confronting mortality and having agency in, your last. Mallory Macduff at Warren Wilson, her book was called Our Last Best Act.
Right.
And so putting your hands and your heart and your time into this vessel that, is going to bring you back into the earth. And it's kind of our last thank you to ourselves.
Hmm.
And then also to the soil into which we will join. Um, and then there are the folks that come to weave for someone that they have lost or are losing. And that often becomes very much a time of connection between those people, if it's, family members, friends, kids coming together to weave, and then between them and that vessel that they're creating with their own hands as like a last act of tending for their person. And I've had cemeterians at the Green Cemetery tell me that they can tell when a family arrives on the day of a burial. She can tell if they came to be part of the casket making with me, that they show up just a little, their shoulders a little more square, a little more
Yeah.
present with the activities of the day. They've already started that
Hmm.
journey of what we're going to be doing in that day.
Hmm.
And so that feels really important as well. A lot of times in a grief situation, you feel very like time has skipped and everything is moving very quickly and you've been left behind and everything feels out of whack. And when you're taking part with these very physical acts day by day, it can kind of help you keep up
Yeah.
with that process mentally that you're going through of saying goodbye.
Hmm. Do people come making plans for the future in that they come and weave their own casket and put it in storage for that day when it
Mhm.
comes?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I also have folks that find a way to use it in their homes. The end of the bed basket to store linens is a popular one. It's a
Wow.
beautiful willow handmade
Ah,
basket, and
Okay.
they're about 6 feet long, which is, about the width of a queen or king size bed. So
right.
quite a few of my folks have them in bedrooms as blanket storage. I've done them as bookcases with a
Oh.
horizontal bottom and a rounded top that goes against the wall with
I
removable
hadn't thought about
shelves.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Coffee tables. People can use them as
Wow.
coffee tables. So some folks find a way to use it. Otherwise, they're quite
Yeah.
lightweight. They weigh about 45 pounds once they're dry. So you can
Yeah.
pop it up in the attic, and a willow
Yeah.
basket will last hundreds of years if you keep it
Ah.
out of the elements. So time wise, storage is not an issue at
Yeah.
all.
I'm curious, you mentioned like the interior of the basket. Are there multiple components or is it just like a basket? Like how
Well,
is it
yeah.
designed?
So different makers have their way of doing things. I very much like to offer a fully finished product if that's what the
Mhm.
family wants. If they want to do the interior bedding themselves, obviously I will absolutely help them and support them in doing that. But I do just an unbleached cotton muslin liner, which lines the inside of the basket, and then a bottom pad. Sometimes I'll make a full mattress with pine shavings from our wood shop or hay from our hay meadow. Sometimes I'll just
Okay.
do a layer of quilt batting or wool batting that, designed to be in the layers of a quilt just to create like a fluffy bottom pad. And then I do a pillow. Um, Pillows, I think they're cozy. And, when having a visitation, having your head raised, it's just a more normal posture. And so I like to just have that in there because a lot of times when folks are trying to be very environmentally conscious, they'll cut the corners and say, "Oh, I don't need a pillow, I'm dead." Um, but there are these little things that maybe not for us, but for our people around us,
Yeah.
it just helps to be able to tend someone. So I
Yeah.
create a pillow and then I make a special mix of herbs and dried flowers from the farm for that person and fill the pillow and little sachets for their family to take if they'd like. And then some folks want a top sheet to cover the top, and other folks, part of the idea of the basket is they want that airflow
Right.
and the sun to be shining through the weave of the basket. So I offer a top sheet if they want it, and about half of people want it and some don't.
Okay.
And then other folks choose to be shrouded inside of their basket, which
Right.
is a very ancient wrapping in fabric,
Hmm. Hmm.
like swaddling a baby.
Hmm.
Wow.
So, Olivia, would you like to go with me to do a workshop and then create one that you could use as a bookcase and then explain to your friends when they come visit? That actually has dual use. One day when I pass away, that's going to be my casket.
That actually would be really cool. I'm
Yeah.
like very intrigued now. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to come and make it for
Yeah.
myself.
Me too.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah, or
Yeah.
just come out I often have folks just come out for the day and
n-
see how it all comes together. We do have the willow here. I grow about an acre of basketry willow, and our local community has been really fantastic coming out to help with harvest, to help with
oh,
planting, to spend
Mm.
time in the willow. I have several interns over the years from the different universities coming out
hmm,
to convert sections to grief gardens and things like that. And it's been just really lovely to watch people come to the farm and interact with the willow and with the land. So you are welcome anytime.
well, that's
Thank
a
you.
concept we'll have to talk about outside the podcast about possibility of interns. Where our
Absolutely.
majors are always looking for internships, and this would certainly be one I think people would be intrigued by.
Wonderful.
You mentioned earlier that the green burial versus more traditional burial, or that the green burial sequesters 25 pounds of carbon versus, so it's clear to Olivia and I that this is a much more ecologically sound process. But could you elaborate a little bit on the harder details of that?
Well, I don't have my numbers in front of me. I
Okay.
wish I were prepared. I will tell you they're shocking,
Yeah.
actually. When you actually look at the yearly tonnage of cement and metals and hardwoods, I look at these lists when I do my presentations and I read out these really incredible
Yeah.
numbers. And I mean, those are the building blocks of our societies.
Yeah.
Those are the materials we build our homes and our roads and the things that we need to live. And we're putting them into the ground, not only unnecessarily, but
Right.
very often against our will
Yeah.
because we don't think we have a choice. Because these are precious materials.
Yes, yes. And I don't think people stop to think about how toxic the chemicals are we use for the embalming process. And
Absolutely. It's a
that
huge
industry has kept itself
carcinogenic
shrouded
risk.
in mystery, and we don't know
Yeah.
much about it. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Though I will say with the embalming, the greatest risk of the embalming chemicals is actually to funeral directors and
yeah,
embalmers.
yeah,
They're the ones with the increased cancer rates. The actual formaldehyde does dissipate
yeah.
fairly quickly in a soil environment, but the cancer risk to funeral directors is incredible.
Mm. Yeah, that's something I hadn't thought about.
Hmm.
I'm curious, earlier you mentioned that when you first wanted to make your own willow farm, you said that there wasn't a lot of people doing it. Is that because the climate is difficult for willow trees to grow? They take a long time. Like, what is the process of like growing willow trees?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting. So the genus Salix, that is
Mhm.
willow, we have our weeping willow trees and
Mhm.
our black willow trees, which we have here
Right.
in abundance. And in Europe, basketry willow it's more of a shrub growth
Mhm.
pattern. And there are several different species of the genus Salix that are coppiced, so cut to the ground annually to create long, slender rods that have been cultivated for basketry for millennia. And so when the English colonists came over to this land here in the 17th century, Some of them did bring cuttings of basketry willow that they would have been used to using as their main basketry material. However, basketry tends to be sort of an indigenous craft where people look around them and they weave what is available.
Right.
And so rather than establish an entire, agricultural crop of an imported plant, they just started using what was here already. So they would have learned to make split ash and split oak and
Right.
sweetgrass and vine and the materials that were here. And
Hmm.
so they just basically adjusted. And then actually the guide that I did use to learn when I was planting is a 1918 US Forestry Service guide to planting willow, where the government did try to establish it as a cash crop economy, primarily up like Pennsylvania and New York. And
Hmm.
there are still remnants of commercial willow beds from that time in the early 1900s,
Yeah.
1920s. But it only takes 3 or 4 years to truly establish. It's an incredibly sustainable crop. It will produce rods 20 to 30 years, even being coppiced to the ground every single winter.
Hmm.
So one single rod is 1 year's growth of the plant. And so my field in the winter is completely cut to the ground. I
Uh,
bundle it, I store it, I weave it all year. And then come the next winter, it loses its leaves. I cut it down, and it's just this magical cycle. And so I think for the symbolism of my work, especially this regenerative
Hmm.
aspect to the willow is really beautiful. Like my families that weave with me, they'll come back year after year and help me harvest the same plants that gave the rods to weave their person's casket. And it's, just seeing them come back and follow those cycles has been really just this beautiful add on to the work. But anyway, it's an incredible plant. It's very low input, doesn't need a lot of water. Well, it does need water, but it finds its own water.
Yeah.
It'll go 20 feet,
mm,
the roots 20 feet in any direction to find its water. And then it doesn't need a lot of fertilizer. So it's a fantastic crop. I think we just didn't really need it
Mm.
when we
yeah.
got here.
What does the harvesting process for
Yeah.
the rods look like? Like the nitty-gritty of it,
Yeah.
like how
Sure.
Is it all by hand?
So it is in the States. We are by hand here. In Europe, where they have, 100-acre willow plantations, they do have some machinery that does mechanically cut it down. But the farmers that I know here in the States, we all cut rod by rod with a pair of clippers. Some of us have bumped up to electronic battery operated clippers, which is a miracle. Um, Big fan. So yeah, but it's hands and knees down on the ground for several weeks every winter, cutting rod by rod.
Yeah.
But it ends up being a really beautiful time.
Yeah.
It's quiet. That's a nice time of year here. It's I think in up north for the harvesting in Vermont in January, it's not such a pleasant
Right.
experience. But down here in North Carolina, harvesting in January is
Hmm.
gorgeous. Yeah, and so I have harvest parties, volunteers come out. We spend time together. It's really nice.
But see, I'm learning so much because when Kimberly first described your operation, and I just did the briefest amount of homework, I'm almost embarrassed to say I had a completely different image. To me,
Yeah.
willows are weeping willows, which are all over
Yeah.
the place around here, and I just envisioned rows and rows of willow trees with you reaching up to harvest the drooping fronds from that.
Yeah, which would be very cool.
Yeah.
I think that would be awesome. And I think that's actually what most people imagine when I say I have a field of willow.
Okay.
They imagine a field of willow trees, but
Yeah.
they're shrubs. They grow. I've planted them 12 inches on center, and you plant them densely so that they grow tall and straight. You
Right.
don't want them branching out to the side.
Okay.
And so they're densely planted in rows of three with 3-foot pathways. And I've got about 6,000 stools. We call it a stool that is the stump that gets cut down to every winter.
I might. So, how hard is it to take a cutting and transpose it? We might like to grow some at our little farm here on campus.
Yeah, it is absolutely as easy as sticking a stick in the ground.
Okay.
It's a wonderful plant to propagate. You take a cutting of 10 to 12 inches and you stick it mostly into the ground with just a couple buds above the ground. And I've had about 98% success sprouting from cuttings.
Okay.
So there are several different nurseries and growers offering cuttings around the country now. They're pricey. It is an expensive crop to establish, but once you have your willow, you can be propagating yourself, and then it grows exponentially
Right.
from there.
So you just propagate each year from it's like seed saving.
From my own
Yeah.
plants. Exactly. Yeah, when I cut my rods to the ground, I set a certain amount aside that I want to keep those varieties going. And I just cut a whole pile of 12-inch sticks, stick them in the fridge, and we stick them in the ground end of February.
Oh, so you save particular varieties for their characteristics.
hmm
Okay.
Yeah, I have about 30 different
Oh,
varieties,
wow.
and I grow different sizes because different sections of the caskets take different size willow. So they grow anywhere from a 4 foot variety to a 12-foot variety. And then the bark has different colors. And so I have a lot of specialty varieties to bring out all the beautiful colors of the willow bark.
This is so much more complex than I imagined. But definitely, I'm going to have to work to stay in communication with you. And under the
Please,
auspices
yeah.
of talking about possible internships, make a day trip up there and talk to you about this because I do think we'd like to try to grow some here. It sounds like a
Yeah, that would
beautiful
be
process.
fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a couple professors at Warren Wilson that have started bringing down classes. Agroecology
Yes.
comes down,
Hmm.
climate and which is it's and climate justice and end of life that Mallory McDuff comes. They come down every year.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I love having groups come out.
Great. Great.
Is it difficult to actually weave the baskets? Like, how do you have like a layout or like a pattern that you follow?
Yeah, sure. So I use 4 primary weave structures. And
Hmm.
so willow weaving is an ancient craft, and there's a long history of very specific patterns, and they all have names. And so I have some of those that I work with, and sometimes I mix them up, but I kind of stick with the same patterns because they all serve a function. Like 3 rod wale is a very heavy, dense weave that helps form the structure and shape of the basket and also gives strength to it. So I place that around the base, around the handles to give strength where I'm setting the rope handles, and underneath the border before I turn down the border. And then like English randing or French randing, either one, they build height quickly, but they're not necessarily structurally sound. So I have to sandwich those between layers of the 3 rod wale. And then I have different borders that I use when I turn down the borders. So for the most part, I've kind of found my rhythm, which I learned in a specific way. My teacher, Mary Lauren Fraser, learned from Karen Collins in the north of Scotland near Inverness. And I actually got to go up last year and meet Karen
Ah,
Collins and weave with her,
yeah.
which was really special. And so from them, I learned a construction technique that was 100% willow. And because there was such a shortage when I started, I did some research and found a way to incorporate a pine base so that I could cut down on the amount of willow that I needed.
Hmm.
And I used to give my clients a choice, pine base or willow base, and almost all of them were choosing the pine base. I think psychologically that
Right.
solid base they like.
Yeah.
So I've really kind of settled into my rhythm. And it also means that, where it used to take me a week and a half to weave one, I can now do it in 4 days because
Hmm.
I've got my set pattern that I follow. But I mix it up. I have 3 different ways that I can do the handles. I have, a few different patterns that I can vary in there. I play with color and do either stripes or blocks of color. So I've started weaving different plants in to integrate in amongst the willow because the willow gives the structural integrity,
Yeah.
but some of that filler could really be other plants. And so I invite people to bring plants from their own land. Or I had one client who was an iris gardener, and he collected all of the leaves off his iris plants at the end of the gardening year. And one of my interns made cordage out of them, and then he wove that cordage into the lid. So that was
That's
really
very
lovely.
cool.
And I
Yeah.
did one, yeah, out at Bluestem Cemetery, where I went out in the fall and harvested the bluestem native grasses that they've been reestablishing there. And for one of their board members, did a tray that incorporated a rope weave of the bluestem grasses.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
cool.
this is just amazing, opening up all sorts of possibilities in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a whole it's something most of us haven't thought
Right.
about or talked
Yeah.
about or seen. And once you start thinking about it, and there are some of us that for ourselves, we start thinking, oh, I would like to create this vessel that represents this and has this. But then I think especially when we're burying somebody that we love, to be able to put our love and care and attention and personalization into this vessel that's going to carry them into the earth. I mean, the possibilities are just
Yeah.
endless.
Yeah. I wanted to ask what the future of Moss and Thistle Farm is. Are you growing your operation, expanding into different areas, or have you found your sweet spot?
Oh, that is so hard. So I have a very hard time saying no to opportunities. And, it's such a growing field. And as more and more people hear about it and more cemeteries are coming online, like you mentioned numbers, there are hundreds of green cemeteries across the country, and they're only 15, 16 conservation cemeteries, which are kind of the Cadillac version, like
Right.
Kimberly and the Campbells have in South Carolina, where there's a conservation
Right.
easement and they're really, restoring that land and preserving it from development and perpetuity. There's just so much happening. I've really gotten into this idea of incorporating other plants, and I'd like to create place-based caskets for the different conservation cemeteries
Right.
that really showcase the native plants there. So there would be one for the hill country of
Hmm.
Texas, or, Southern California, where I actually grew up. There's a green burial ground there, and I know those plants like the back of my
Sure.
hand. So I would love to be able to weave with those plants. So I have some of those ideas. I'm doing a lot just around the farm with internships and apprentices, trying to grow the craft. I'm working on a couple books.
Ooh.
But I also think I've spiraled out a little bit too much, which is my tendency, as everyone who knows me will tell you. This is on brand. So I am really at this point. I just turned 50, so it's like a watershed year,
Hmm.
really trying to refocus and make sure I keep the weaving and my community and my people at the heart of what I do, because that is what feeds me. And I feel such honor to be able to do this work. You have no idea, like just the gratitude
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
get to support my family working with the
Hmm.
land and serving my community. Like I truly could not have dreamed this up. I have rather, I was in social work, I was in public health, I was Peace Corps. I did many, many things in my
Mhm.
road to get to this place, but I feel like I've landed in this beautiful mix that some days I just don't even, it's hard to believe it's actually real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very,
So it is a sweet
yes.
spot.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate this. Again, my head's just exploding with ideas, and I will definitely be in touch about a potential visit or two.
Please
Yes,
do. Excellent. No, I would love
Yeah.
that. And I'm going to be out near Elon in a couple months, so I'll email
definitely.
you about
Please
that
do.
too.
Oh,
Please do.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time to hop on today and chat with not only us, but the rest of the Elon community about the importance of connecting humans to nature in all aspects of our life cycle. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and always feel free to leave us a comment with any feedback. Thank you very much.